The restaurant fell silent for just a heartbeat, but for Daniel Carter, that heartbeat felt like a lifetime. Across the room, sitting by the window with a cup of untouched coffee, was the one person he never expected to see on the night he had finally agreed to go on a blind date. His neighbor, Emily Harper, looked at him with surprise that quickly melted into heartbreak. She lowered her eyes, forced a faint smile that never reached them, and quietly whispered to herself, "Why not me?" Daniel never heard the words, but somehow they echoed through the rest of his life. If stories about kindness, healing, and unexpected second chances speak to you, we hope this one gives you something to reflect on. Feel free to share your thoughts or your own experiences as you watch. Daniel had been raising his 6-year-old daughter Lily alone for nearly 4 years. His wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving behind a little girl who barely remembered her mother's voice and a husband who struggled every day to remember how to smile. Every morning began before sunrise. He packed lunches, braided Lily's hair after watching countless online tutorials, worked long shifts as a mechanic, picked her up from school, cooked dinner, helped with homework, and somehow still found the strength to read bedtime stories before exhaustion claimed him. Life had become less about dreams and more about surviving one day at a time. The only constant source of warmth outside his daughter was the woman who lived next door. Emily had moved into the neighborhood shortly after Daniel's loss. She was an elementary school art teacher whose cheerful garden slowly transformed the quiet street into a place filled with flowers and color. She never crossed boundaries, never forced conversations, and never treated Daniel like someone who needed pity. Instead, she simply showed up in small, meaningful ways. She shoveled snow from his driveway before he woke up. She baked extra muffins that somehow always ended up on his porch. She remembered Lily's birthday every year and celebrated every tiny accomplishment with genuine excitement. Lily adored Emily without hesitation. She often wandered into Emily's backyard to help water flowers or paint little clay pots on warm afternoons. Daniel appreciated everything Emily did, but grief had built invisible walls around his heart. He convinced himself that allowing anyone too close would somehow betray the love he still carried for his late wife. Emily understood more than he realized, and although feelings quietly grew inside her, she buried them beneath friendship, believing that some hearts simply needed more time. Months became years. Their routines intertwined naturally. Neighborhood barbecues, school events, and countless ordinary evenings slowly created memories neither of them fully acknowledged. People around them often assumed they were already a family. Daniel would simply smile politely and change the subject. Emily would laugh softly before finding an excuse to walk away. Then one afternoon, Daniel's older sister visited. Watching him move through the motions of life, she gently suggested that perhaps it was time to meet someone new. She reminded him that loving again would never erase the love he had lost. Daniel resisted at first, but eventually agreed to one blind date simply to prove that his heart was no longer capable of opening. The date was arranged at a quiet restaurant across town. Daniel dressed in clothes he rarely wore and spent more time looking in the mirror than he had in years. Lily noticed immediately. She asked if he was going somewhere special. Daniel smiled awkwardly and simply said he was meeting a friend. Lily wished him a good evening, but something about her expression lingered in his mind as he drove away. Emily had chosen the same restaurant that evening to celebrate the retirement of a fellow teacher. She almost canceled because she was tired after a long week, but decided everyone deserved a little happiness now and then. She never imagined she would look across the dining room and see Daniel sitting nervously across from another woman. It wasn't jealousy that hurt first. It was the sudden realization that she had spent years quietly hoping without ever allowing herself to hope at all. She watched Daniel trying his best to make polite conversation, but his smile looked forced, almost painful. She lowered her eyes, whispered the words that escaped before she could stop them, "Why not me?" and quickly left before anyone noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. That night, Daniel returned home strangely unsettled. His date had been perfectly pleasant, yet every conversation felt empty, every laugh sounded rehearsed. For reasons he couldn't explain, he kept thinking about home, about Lily, and about the peaceful evenings spent talking over fences with Emily while the sunset painted the neighborhood gold. The following morning, Emily's curtains remained closed. Her colorful garden looked neglected for the first time since she had moved in. Lily noticed immediately and asked if Emily was feeling sick. Daniel hesitated before knocking on her door. Emily answered with tired eyes and a smile that tried too hard. She insisted she was simply exhausted, but Daniel sensed there was more she wasn't saying. As they stood awkwardly on the porch, Lily ran over carrying one of her handmade drawings. It showed the three of them standing together beneath a giant tree, holding hands while colorful birds flew overhead. At the bottom of the picture, written in uneven childlike letters, were the words, "My favorite family." Neither adult knew what to say. Something shifted inside Daniel as he looked at the drawing. For years he had believed protecting his heart meant protecting Lily too. Yet children often saw truths adults buried beneath fear. Lily had never viewed Emily as someone replacing her mother. She simply saw another person who loved her without expecting anything in return. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself paying attention to moments he had always overlooked. He noticed how Emily instinctively remembered Lily's favorite books. He noticed the way she listened without interrupting whenever he spoke about difficult days. He noticed that every act of kindness she offered came without conditions or expectations. Most importantly, he realized she had never tried to rescue him from grief. She had simply walked beside him until he was ready to carry it differently. One evening, Daniel discovered an old photo album while cleaning the attic. Inside was a handwritten note from his late wife tucked between two photographs. It spoke about love not as something that ended when a person was gone, but as something that continued growing through the lives of those left behind. Reading those words felt like receiving permission he had been denying himself for years. The next afternoon, Daniel walked next door carrying a small potted sunflower. Emily opened the door expecting another ordinary visit. Instead, she saw a man whose guarded expression had finally softened. He admitted that fear had blinded him for far too long. He confessed that the blind date had only shown him what had been quietly waiting beside him all along. He thanked her for every unnoticed kindness, every patient smile, and every moment she chose compassion over disappointment. Tears filled Emily's eyes, not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because someone had finally seen the love she had never demanded to be recognized. Their relationship did not transform overnight into a fairy tale. They moved carefully, respecting the memories they both carried and the future they hoped to build. There were difficult conversations, moments of uncertainty, and days when grief unexpectedly returned. But unlike before, Daniel no longer faced those moments alone. Emily stood beside him, and together they created a home where love honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Lily flourished in the warmth surrounding her. The little house that had once echoed with silence slowly filled with laughter, birthday celebrations, messy art projects, weekend gardening, and family traditions that belonged uniquely to them. Daniel eventually realized that healing was never about forgetting. It was about allowing joy to exist alongside sorrow. Before this story comes to an end, we'd love to know what you think. Have you ever witnessed kindness quietly change someone's life or experienced a second chance when you least expected it? Your reflections are always welcome. Years later, Daniel often thought back to that restaurant. He never heard Emily whisper those heartbreaking words, but he believed that somehow his heart had. Sometimes life doesn't send grand signs or dramatic miracles. Sometimes it sends a patient neighbor who waters flowers, bakes muffins, comforts a lonely child, and waits without asking for anything in return. The greatest love stories are not always the loudest. They are often written in quiet acts of kindness that slowly heal hearts too afraid to hope again. And perhaps that is the most beautiful reminder of all, that the person meant to change your life may have been standing beside you the whole time, waiting not to be noticed, but simply to be loved.